This is a story about consequences, and in particular, the consequences of one 90-year-old law that was passed under dubious circumstances.
They're using Section 1325 of that act, which criminalizes coming across the border, to incarcerate the parents and then separate them.
Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act was front and center in the Democratic primary debates, and it took me down a wormhole of history. America's immigration system in the 1920s was much different. We had a quota system, only allowing so many people from particular countries at a time. Most ports of entry were on the coast because most of the people were coming from Europe and Asia. The countries in this hemisphere were exempt because southwestern states needed farm workers. That changed after the Mexican Revolution and the religious crackdowns that came after the Mexican Revolution. Now, those immigrants came to America when racism was on the rise, anti-immigrant fervor was at its height, in particular, anti-Catholic immigrant fervor was at its height. In 1924, Congress created the United States Border Patrol, and in 1929, a Democratic senator from the former Confederacy, Coleman Bliss, passed Section 1325 into the Immigration and Nationality Act, making crossing the border not at a port of entry against the law, and the term illegal immigrant was born. Around a decade later, we entered World War II, and we needed guns, planes, and tanks, and people to build them. And when that war ended, many Americans liked the influx of labor from the South. And so Congress created guest worker programs where people would come in, work, and then leave. After 9/11, the Bush administration created the Department of Homeland Security, and we began enforcing Section 1325 more and more through the Bush administration, and then even more than that in the Obama administration. At this time, violence in Mexico returned, and people began taking a more critical look at immigration and the crime associated with it.
This is the ground. This is ground zero. This is the front lines, and this is where we are making our stand.
The Trump administration announced that they would enforce the law every time. Now, the key to the outrage, the protests, the lawsuits was one word: arrested. When you're arrested, you can't take your kids to jail with you.
100 Austin attorneys are preparing to head to the border to offer legal services to families.
They went from 500 kids here in April to almost 1,500 right now.
This zero tolerance policy is cruel, it is immoral, and it breaks my heart.
I don't care where you are on the spectrum as far as immigration is concerned. Separating children from their parents is not the way to go.
So when the parents were arrested, the children went under the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And so a consequence of enforcing Section 1325 every time made family separation part of United States policy. So what would happen if we repealed Section 1325? Immigration attorney Karen Crawford told me not much would change at all, because deportation is not a criminal issue. It's a civil issue, so people could still get deported for being here illegally.
There's still removal proceedings. Everybody who comes to the border would still be going through immigration inspection, would still be going through the proceedings, and either within the Border Patrol processes that they have, or referred into the immigration court. So all of that would stay the same.
The idea to repeal this law came to a head in the Democratic primary debate, really thanks to former San Antonio Mayor and HUD Secretary Julian Castro.
Getting rid of Section 1325 of the Immigration and Nationality Act, to go back to the way we used to treat this when somebody comes across the border, not to criminalize desperation.
But let's look at the politics of this.
Raise your hand if you think it should be a civil offense rather than a crime to cross the border without documentation.
President Trump has used this to say that Democrats want open borders, and I asked Castro about that very thing earlier this year.
Open borders is just a Republican talking point.
Yes, but it could be a talking point that is effective. Border security in Texas is the #1 issue, and many people want crossing the border to be a crime.
One of the things we see when we're trying to discuss solutions to immigration issues is people just shut down when they say, but it's illegal. Even if you're processed for the crime, you still have to deal with the civil side of this, and what are you going to do? And if you just shut the door and say, illegal, so we're not going to talk about it, you're not going to have any solutions.
So we're gonna talk about it. And many people will too when they weigh their choice for president and weigh the direction they want this country to go in.